Hello, viewers. Today, we have a story filled with shocking revelations and intense emotions. Prepare yourselves as we dive into the tale titled Beachside Scandal. Husband exposes cheating wife in epic revenge. 4 months ago, my life took a devastating turn. My wife, 35, and I, 33, had been married for 2 years. I was scheduled for a 2-day business trip, but after 5 hours of driving, the trip was abruptly canceled. I decided to return home, only to find a car parked beside my wife's. It belonged to her brother, a man I had always found overly close to my wife. As I entered our home, I was shocked to find them slow dancing to romantic music, their embrace far too intimate for siblings. They quickly separated when they saw me, but the damage was done. My wife tried to explain it away, saying her brother needed emotional support. However, their behavior made me deeply suspicious. Not long after, I found explicit messages on her phone, revealing an incestuous affair with her brother. My world shattered. I hired a private investigator to gather concrete evidence. Soon, I had photos of them behaving like a couple on a romantic getaway at a beachside hotel. In a fit of betrayal and rage, I printed the photos and hung them all over our house. Then, I invited our families and friends, including her brother's wife and baby, to our home. I left a note on the door instructing them to let themselves in, and I left town with all my belongings. Chaos erupted when they saw the pictures. My wife's family was in shock, and her brother was physically confronted by relatives. The hotel called the police, but my wife and her brother fled before they arrived. Both our marriages crumbled, and divorce proceedings began. At the time this went down 4 months ago, my wife, 35, and I, 33, had been married for 2 years. I was scheduled to go on a 2-day-long business trip, leaving extremely early one day and returning the next day in the evening. Well, after 5 hours of driving, the trip was canceled. I wasn't terribly bothered because I was used to driving and would be compensated for my time. I decided to return home unexpectedly. When I arrived, I was surprised to see another car parked beside my wife's. It was her brother's car. He was a buff dude, married with a baby that my wife would often babysit. She loved it because she looked forward to becoming a mother. Her and her brother were really close and enjoyed hiking. It didn't matter what the weather was like. All year round they would go on long hiking expeditions together. I didn't mind, it was their thing, and I was not an outdoorsy person. I'd usually work a little more or dedicate time to my hobby of building miniature boats. Although I fully supported their relationship, I became a little weary of my wife's brother when he became exceptionally emotional at our wedding and planted a huge kiss on his sister's lips. I couldn't do anything about it, it happened so fast. He asked me to forgive him later, blaming what he did on the high emotions he felt seeing his sister get married and leave the family. When I arrived home and parked behind my wife's car, I could hear slow music playing loudly. It was an odd setting to imagine my wife and brother-in-law in. I didn't have to imagine it because I walked in on them slow dancing together. He was holding her close to his body. Their embrace was that of a romantic couple's. When they noticed my presence, they broke apart quickly and looked really guilty. I knew my marriage was in jeopardy by their expressions. My wife tried to say her brother needed emotional support because his marriage was struggling. To me, that did not explain why they were slow dancing in my living room. As hard as it was, I didn't ask them any more questions. They were aware of how odd it looked. I didn't have to wait long before my wife went to go babysit her baby niece one day. She accidentally left her phone behind and I found her WhatsApp. It revealed that she was sexting her brother, sending pictures, saying I love you, and arranging hookups with him by claiming she was going to babysit. It was the most disgusting and disturbing discovery I ever made in my life. I threw her phone and ran to the bathroom to be sick. Everyone always assumed they were really close because they had trouble making friends when they were younger and shared an enthusiasm for hiking that no one else in the family did. I wouldn't confront her about it immediately because it certainly wouldn't have stopped them. I realized that I was just the cover husband, so he could have a secret sexual relationship with her blood brother. I went back to her phone as I boiled with anger and betrayal and took screenshots to send to myself. I planned out my revenge, which involved a bit of acting on my part. It was excruciating to see her behave so normally when returned home, like she didn't just hook up with her brother behind my back. I, too, acted as though everything was normal. I laid awake beside her that night in our marital bed. The very next morning, I hired a PI to get me photos of them. When I announced the truth, she wouldn't be able to wiggle out of the consequences. Not long after, she claimed she was going on a hiking trip with her brother and I played along, notifying the PI. He called me late that night and notified me that she got hotel room with her brother along the beach a few hours away. I started packing my things because it was only a matter of time before I got pictures. I didn't know why they weren't actually hiking together this time, but I didn't care either. At this point, I didn't care about anything and just felt numb. I received pictures of them walking on the beach and boardwalk like newlyweds. His hand on her butt, full kisses on the lips, staring into each other's eyes over drinks at the bar, both of them entering a hotel room, clearly in a romantic relationship. I was ready to leave, but before I left, I invited her immediate and extended family and friends over, including her brother's wife and baby. I printed large copies of the pictures I received and hung them all over the house, starting at the front door. On my way out, I left a note on the door instructing them to let themselves in. Little did they know, I left town for my friend's house with all my belongings and no plans to return. They called me after they entered home, frantically asking me what those pictures were. I spelled it out for them on speakerphone. These two members of the family were incestuous freaks that have probably been in a sexual relationship since they lived with their parents. Then I told them where they currently were if they didn't believe me and wanted to see for themselves. Hours later, I got a call from my soon-to-be ex-wife. She was screaming and I could hear the chaos in the background. It became clear that her entire family and a few of her friends had shown up at their hotel. Her brother was being beaten by cousins, and the hotel called the police. She asked why I did this to her, and I told her she deserved it. She had been living a lie that she wouldn't be able to continue anymore. I told her the divorce papers were on the table and she started wailing, so I hung up. I was hurt enough as it was and didn't want to dwell on how her life would turn out. Her mom called me a few days later to apologize on behalf of her daughter and son. She updated me and said the police never arrived at the hotel, so hotel staff started breaking up the fight themselves. In the chaos, the brother and sister fled to escape scrutiny. The whole family was a wreck for a few days, but things are settling amongst them now. The wife of the brother is filing for divorce as well, along with custody and child support. Before they fled, neither of them signed divorce papers, so that's a waiting game for now. I'm relieved this was all exposed when it was, because I can't imagine continuing that relationship any longer without knowing the truth. I just want to put this all behind me and I feel like I'm on the right track. I found a nice place and continue working for the same company I was in. I'm continuing to take this one step at a time. This whole thing is still so surreal for me. Opie, I can't imagine the emotional torment you've been through. I'm so relieved you didn't decide to start having children with her before all of this was revealed. It would have been horrible if she got pregnant by her brother and tried to claim the inbred child was yours. Although this discovery caused you pain, it is so much better that the truth is out. I love how you handled this situation because you knew announcing it immediately wouldn't cause them to stop and might have even backfired on you. You were patient and fast, aiming to gather the much-needed evidence you required. These two people are horrible, not just because of their actions, but because they married two people and hid the affairs they had. I believe luck is on your side. This couldn't have been worse if it came out years later. I wish you the best of luck, Opie. Now for today's second story. My wife and I were both busy working people when I discovered our marriage was over. She was 27 and I was 33. We were only married for 2 years, but maybe that was a good thing. On the day it went down, we arranged a short getaway together at a cabin almost 2 hours away from our house. After we arrived and got settled, she asked me to look up a recipe she wanted to make for dinner. My phone was almost dead, so I plugged it in and wondered how she was going to handle this. Over the past few months, I noticed she was distancing herself from me. She was on her phone way more and even added a passcode on it. This was weird because we worked so much. Who would be trying to access her phone? She was so open with me up until it all changed, and she just didn't feel the need to tell me about her day. So I told her my phone was charging to see what she'd do. She unlocked her phone and tossed it to me as she stirred, telling me to look it up on hers. I did so and read it to her. As I was just about to lock her phone again to be locked out of it forever, a silent WhatsApp notification appeared. I didn't know she had that app. I clicked on it instinctively, and it led me to a string of messages between her and another man. The first two messages were, "Hey, how's it going? And I miss you so much. Can't stop thinking about how good you feel." I must have turned white, because I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision became blurry, and I left the room with her phone. She was still cooking, unaware anything was wrong. I focused my eyes and stilled my trembling hands so I could keep reading older stuff. It spanned back farther than I was willing to look. I took screenshots of their sexting pictures, talk of past sex and plans for future sex. And there, "I love you." I grabbed my keys with her phone in my hand and left. I didn't say anything to her. As I drove, I forged a message to her lover saying that the getaway ended early and he should meet her at a specific restaurant at a specific time. He agreed. I drove for 2 hours, although it felt like forever. I was in deep thought about what my future held now that my marriage was over. I already had anxiety about the next woman. I fall in love with cheating on me. I wondered what this guy was going to try to do or say to me, but it didn't really matter. The most I wanted was an explanation. When I saw him enter, I recognized him from the pictures and videos. I entered the restaurant right behind him and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He jerked away and looked at me with major concern. Before he could say anything, I told him who I was, that he stole my wife from me, and that we should talk about it. I led him to a table, started recording on my phone, which now had all the evidence from my wife's phone as well, and told him to spill the beans. He hesitated, but I told him this was the least he could do. He told me they had been seeing each other for about 10 months already. They were introduced by coworkers and instantly fell for each other. In a few weeks, she was in his bed. He swore she was the one for him, and he was in love. I told him he could have it. I had no more use for her. I thanked him profusely for saving me 18 years of child support. I told him where she was and asked him to go pick her up. I drove home with a broken heart. It was broken before, but it was worse knowing how long ago this started. My phone rang, and it was the landline from the cabin we were staying at. My wife was panicked, asking me if I was okay and why I just left like that. She added that she couldn't find her phone and forgot we had a landline. I called her a liar and said she shouldn't have let me see her phone if she was guilty of having an affair. She was stunned and started stuttering to make excuses. I told her she need not bother, that I had already met with the man and got all the proof I need. She started yelling in surprise, trying to clarify where I knew and who I spoke to. I added that he was on the way to come get her and she should pack all of our stuff. She said something else, but I hung up. I arrived home and packed up what I needed to be okayed for a few months. I didn't know how long she'd be in the house before she left. Thankfully, we got a prenup so I wouldn't lose the house or pay her alimony. The last thing I did was update her social media, changed her status to single and posted a selfie of the two. I put her phone down and heard it immediately start blowing up with confused friends and family. I called my best friend to vent and cry, and not only did he have space for me to stay for a while, but he also arranged for me to meet with his cousin, a divorce attorney. Before my friend arrived to pick me up, my wife was brought home by her lover. She was upset with me, which was ridiculous, and she kept asking me questions. For someone who knew what was going on, she sure was clueless. I started playing the recording of her lover explaining how they met and started sleeping together. She started crying her eyes out, claiming that he was exaggerating their relationship and she never planned on leaving me or continuing to see him. When she said this, he was standing in the doorway unbeknownst to her. He was offended and left. I thought good for him as he drove down the road and my wife screamed in frustration. I told her to pack her stuff and get out of the house because it belonged to me. I added that I'd send divorce papers to her parents' house. She sat on the front step crying as I left. I heard that she was still living with them when her boyfriend left her after an astounding 2 months. Since I had been paying for her schooling, She struggled to afford it on her own. Her parents couldn't afford it and actually made her move into a tiny apartment with her much younger sister. Meanwhile, I met the love of my life, and we have our second child on the way. I can now say without a doubt that my wife is faithful, loving, and meant for me. I'm so thankful I decided to leave my ex right away without staying and trying to work it out. I am so sorry you went through this, OP. Thank the universe you didn't end up raising an affair child as your own or paying child support for years. It's extremely lucky you discovered the truth when you did and had the strength to take the steps you needed to. She started sleeping with a coworker without much hesitation or thought about her marriage with you. It turned out that even the man she cheated on you with dumped her. This is an excellent story to help spread hope to people that have been cheated on. It's definitely possible to let go of what you're used to and exist outside your comfort zone in order to heal and live a better life. I wish you and your new wife all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you are moved by this story of betrayal and revenge, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share this video to remind everyone of the importance of trust and fidelity in relationships. Stay tuned for more captivating content, and remember, the truth always. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we have an explosive story that will leave you stunned. Get ready for a tale of betrayal, deceit, and the ultimate confrontation titled, Catching My Wife Cheating with Her Boss, the explosive confrontation. Buckle up, because this one is intense. Nancy Moore was 28 years old and worked in the accounting department of an insurance company. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon when she got a call from her husband, Jack. Hi, Nancy. Are you working overtime today? Nancy sensed something wrong in Jack's voice. Are you okay, Jack? What's the matter? Nancy asked. She was a little worried. I'm fine. I got home early today and wondered if you'd be here by 5:30. There's no overtime today. Do you want me to leave now, honey? Nancy asked. Don't worry, I'll just rest for now. I'll see you later. Jack hung up the phone. Nancy was sure something was bothering Jack. She went straight to her boss's office. Nancy, we need to go over some files during overtime today. Alan Perkins reminded Nancy with a broad smile before she could say anything. Alan, I'm here to ask permission to leave early. Are you all right? Alan frowned. I'm fine, it's Jack. I don't think he's well. He just called me from home. Do what you need to do, Nancy. We'll catch up next time. She looked at her boss and nodded. When Nancy entered the house, she found Jack napping on the couch. I'm home, honey. Are you feeling all right? Yes, of course I am. Jack sat up. I'm a little tired. You came in early. He glanced at his watch. I canceled work right after you called. I know you, Jack Moore. Something's bothering you. Nancy sat down next to him on the couch. The thing is, we need to talk. Jack turned his face and looked Nancy in the eye. God, Nancy thought. Please, I don't want any bad news. She took a deep breath. What do you want to talk about, Jack? She asked fearfully. I don't know where to start, except that we've grown distant from each other lately. Nancy frowned. I'm going to be honest with you, Nancy. I've fallen out of love with you. What? Nancy twitched. Honey, we're a married couple and we have a lot of goals for our future. You know I'm going to be off the pill in a couple months. As we discussed, I want to have our first child by early next year. We'll buy our own house and I know, Nancy. Jack intervened. I met someone. Someone? Nancy couldn't hold back her tears. Yes, a young woman, and we're in love. I'm sorry, but there's no easy way to tell you this. But Jack, how could you do this to me? To us? Nancy was still trying to process what was happening. We've known each other for 5 years and married for 3. In the last 6 months, you've changed and you've been neglecting me. I've never neglected you, Jack. I've always been here for you. You started with your weekly overtime, sometimes twice a week. But Jack, I did it for us. We need the money to buy a house. Then you started your weekly hen parties with your coworkers. After that, you went shopping every Saturday for a couple hours a day. I work so hard, Jack. I need some time off for myself. Do you ever think about me? Jack almost screamed. Instead of meeting your coworkers, we could meet once a week for a date night. On Saturdays, we could go shopping together. Nancy stared at the floor. Now she realized what she had done. Please, Jack, I love you. We can work this out. Nancy, 3 months ago when I talked to you about these problems, you were angry. You even raised your voice at me. Do you remember? I'm really sorry, Jack, if I hurt you. 3 months ago, I didn't think so. Now I know I only cared about myself. Please, Jack, give me another chance. Let's work on our marriage. 3 months ago, I was completely depressed. On my lunch break, this woman came and sat next to me. She works in another department. She noticed that I was crying. She talked to me. A couple days later, she asked what was wrong with my life. I told her everything. I needed to share my pain with someone, and she became a shoulder to cry on. Is she the one? Yes, Nancy, she's the one. And gradually, we became emotionally attracted and finally fell in love. What's her name? What does she do? Nancy asked with tears running down her face. Her name and what she does is not important. You're better off not knowing her. Were you too close? Yes, Nancy, I'm so sorry. How could you? Nancy screamed. Nancy, tell me, when was the last time we made love? Okay, it was. Nancy struggled to remember. It was a month ago, and it wasn't lovemaking. We just had a quickie because you were so tired at the time. During these past 6 months, you were always tired. We've only had sex 3 times. But Jack, you should have asked. You should have done something about it. Nancy, sex is part of life as a couple. It happens naturally. There's nothing to ask. So you were getting from her what I wasn't giving you? Yes, and more than that. Nancy frowned. She does what you've always refused to do, Jack continued. You've always refused to give me other positions because you said you didn't like dirty sex. Since we've been together, I've tried several times to convince you to try it. But you've always turned me down. So she's better than me in bed? Nancy sobbed. I'd rather say I get more pleasure from her. She's always trying to find sensitive places on my body. I'm sorry, Jack, if I couldn't be enough for you in bed. You'll be served tomorrow. I've filed for irreconcilable differences. I took 50% of our savings today. We will keep our respective cars. We both work. Alimony is out of the question. The lease on this house expires in a few months. I'm staying here. I'll move into the guest room tonight. You better call your parents and explain everything. I suppose you'll move in with them. Will she move in here in the meantime? No, she won't. She doesn't want to touch your stuff, our furniture, or anything else that reminds her of you and our time together. In fact, we've already found an apartment in the new Lakeshore Heights complex. We chose a condo with a balcony that overlooks the lake. The building will be ready in a couple months, which is good for me since I'll need to move out of here at almost the same time. Lakeshore Heights, Nancy thought to herself. That's where I was planning to move, and I was going to convince Jack to buy a condo there. But why don't you move in with her? Nancy asked. She has a roommate in her one-bedroom apartment, and they had originally decided not to bring in any third parties. For that reason, we always had to book a motel room, and sometimes we did it in the back seat of my car. Jack, I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you and grow old with you. Is there any way we can work on our marriage? I will turn a blind eye to your 3-month elopement with this girl. I'll never bring it up, I promise. I'll give you everything she gives you. I will never deny you anything. We can go to counseling. Unfortunately, Nancy, I've already made up my mind. Jack's up. I'm going to take my things to the guest room and take a little nap. What if I refuse the divorce? I'll fight it. You'll spend a lot of money on attorney's fees. And worst case scenario, I'll just move far away with her. I'll stay married to you, but I won't live with you. You can't do that, it's illegal. It really is. There is no law in this country that can make me stay here with you. Jack, don't go, Nancy exclaimed. Later, she called her parents and briefly explained the situation. Half an hour later, they were sitting next to her in the living room. How could he do that to you? John, Nancy's father, was furious. He can't give up 3 years of marriage because you don't care about him for a couple months, Mary shouted. He should have talked to you and worked things out. It was my fault, Mom. Nancy wiped away her tears. I neglected him, and it pushed him into that woman's arms. He needs to realize that you were doing all of this for both of you, and you needed some time to yourself because of the hard work. John said, I want to talk to him. Please get him in here. No, Dad, he's resting. You can talk to him in a couple days when you've calmed down. Will you pack your things and come with us? We'll help you, Mary said to her daughter. No, Mom, I'll stay, Nancy said while her parents were confused. I'll try to get him back. Are you sure? Both parents asked at the same time yes. Okay, we're leaving now, but if anything happens, just call us. You got it? Yes, Dad. Nancy went to her room and cried until she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, she woke up and went down to the kitchen. She found an empty pizza box next to the garbage can. He didn't wake me up for dinner. He only ordered food for himself. Nancy hesitated. She drank a glass of water and went back to bed. The next morning, as she left her room, she heard the garage door slam and Jack's car sped away. She packed up and drove to work. Before lunch, Alan Perkins, her boss, called Nancy into his office. You've been acting strange since this morning. I think you've been crying. Is everything all right at home? He asked. Jack's divorcing me. What? How? Did he? He found someone else. He's in love with her. I'm really sorry. He said I neglected him, and it's true. Nancy lowered her head. He found solace in a young woman working for his company. Do you need some time off? You can take as many days off as you want. I'll let you know when I need them. In the meantime, I prefer to come to work, but I won't stay late. I understand. That afternoon, Nancy cooked Jack's favorite meal. When he got home, the kitchen was filled with the aroma. He headed straight to his room without saying a word to Nancy. Later, he went downstairs, washed, and changed his clothes. I have a date tonight, he told Nancy. I've got things ready for both of us, and Nancy almost cried. You'd better not cook for me since we'll be eating separately from now on. As you wish, Jack. When can I expect you back? I don't know what time I'll be back. Jack headed for the door. I love you, Jack. Tears streamed down her face. Jack closed the door behind him. The next day when Nancy got home, Jack was already there. Nancy put her purse away and went into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. The doorbell rang. It's for you, Jack said without looking at Nancy. She frowned and went to open the door for a man in a suit. Are you Mrs. Nancy Moore? Yes, I am. You've been served. He handed her a manila envelope. Have a nice evening, ma'am. The man turned and walked away. Nancy almost fainted when she took the envelope. She had to lean against the wall. Please sign this and let's get on with our lives, Jack said into her back. Nancy turned around and looked Jack straight in the eye. So for 6 months I neglected you and you forgot all the good times we had together. I told you I would change and I will. I'll be a better wife and a better friend. Please, I'm begging you, Jack. I'm only asking for one more chance. This was a mistake. Can't you forgive me? A mistake. How can it be a mistake if you planned it all out in advance? It's not what you think. You tell me what I should be thinking. About the good times we used to have together, so you put an end to it. And believe me, the time I'm spending with her now is much better than the time we had together. Just sign the papers, okay? Jack made his way to his room. Nancy sat down and opened the envelope with trembling hands. She looked through the papers and signed them. Later, when she went into her room, she heard Jack talking on the phone. His door was open. Yes, baby, he said. She was served this afternoon. The countdown has begun. I love you too, sweetheart. You going off the pill right now is a good idea. We can get married right after the divorce with your bloated belly. You'll look fantastic in your wedding dress. Nancy went into her room and closed the door behind her. If only I could go back in time, she said to herself. The next day, she woke up early, left her papers on the kitchen table, and drove to work. There, she called her parents and told them about her situation. They asked her to pack her things and leave the house. She only replied that she would do so. She later informed Alan Perkins that she had signed the divorce papers. It must be very hard for you, he asked. You can't imagine how much. It's like the whole world has come crashing down on me, Nancy sobbed. You shouldn't let yourself be humiliated. You're still young. Maybe life has other good things in store for you in the future. Jack was my future, and I blew it. Can we go for a drink after work to take the pressure off a bit? Alan Perkins asked. It all started with drinks after work, remember? Nancy turned around and walked to her workplace. As the days went by, Jack would come home late after dinner at the restaurant. When he was home, he made his own sandwiches. He did his own shopping. Nancy began to behave more defiantly at home, walking around in shorts and a tank top with no bra. Sometimes she would come into the kitchen wrapped in a towel when Jack was there. She would play the music and songs he liked best. Sometimes she would bow to him. She always waited for him in the evening and tried to strike up a conversation. Sometimes he would refuse, pretending to be tired and retire to his room. But sometimes he would sit down and listen to her. She never talked about the other woman. She always made it a point to bring back their old memories together, where she saw the sparkle in his eyes and the smile on his face. But then he would change the topic of conversation. On weekends, Jack would mow the grass or find something to do to keep himself busy, avoiding Nancy. In the evening, he would go out alone and return very late. One Friday night, she called Jack and asked him out that night. It would be dinner and dancing. He said yes. She was extremely happy. Even her coworkers noticed the change in her. She got home early and got ready. She applied nail polish and chose the dress Jack liked best, a turquoise pleated short-sleeve dress. She did her hair and carefully selected her makeup. They had a nice dinner, talking about everything but their real situation. For a moment, Nancy felt like everything that had happened in the last 6 months was like a nightmare. And she just woke up, leaving everything behind, like they were still the madly in love couple they used to be. After dinner, they got their drinks and went to sit near the dance floor. A man came over and asked Nancy to dance. She looked at Jack, who shrugged his shoulders. She politely declined, and the man left. Will you dance with me? She asked Jack. Without saying a word, Jack stood up, took her hand, and dragged her to the dance floor. They danced for 5 songs in a row. They moved to the beat of the music. As they walked back to their table, a slow song came on. Without saying a word, Nancy pulled Jack onto the dance floor, snuggled up to him, and rested her head on his shoulder. He could feel her breath on his neck. For weeks, she had wanted to hold him, feel his body next to hers, and make passionate love to him. Let's go home, Jack whispered in her ear. Nancy smiled. On the drive back, Jack concentrated on driving while Nancy sat humming the songs they had just danced together. After Jack parked his car in the garage, Nancy ran to her room, leaving the door open, undressed, and lay naked on the bed waiting for her husband. Jack walked down the hall, past Nancy's room without even looking at her, and headed for the guest room. A shaken Nancy lay on the bed trying to comprehend what had happened. She jumped up and rushed into the guest room. She opened the door without knocking. Jack was shirtless. What happened? Why aren't you taking your wife? It's been weeks since you've touched me, and I'm horny as hell. And I know you are, too. Nancy, we're getting a divorce. We can't be intimate. We're still married, and I'm still your wife. Please, honey, make love to me. She walked over to Jack and tried to put her arms around him. He avoided her and sat down on his bed. Take what is yours, Jack. You can possess every inch of my body. Do whatever you want of me. She sat down next to him and tried to kiss him on the lips. He turned away, and she touched his cheek. Please, Jack, don't leave me. Don't divorce me. I love you. I'm only asking for your forgiveness. I know we can work things out. Let's just forget about these stupid 6 months like they never existed. You can do that, Jack, because you don't hate me. It's a little late for that, Nancy. It's never too late, Jack. Your weakness led you to someone else. You were vulnerable because of the situation I created. I was stupid and selfish. I've realized my mistakes, and I promise it will never happen again. I will be the best wife on this earth. Jack said nothing. There was a detached expression in his eyes. Nancy knelt down in front of him and took both of his hands. I will be your slave, Jack. Your wish is law to me. You can beat me every day. Punish me for what I did to you. Humiliate me. But Jack, be my husband until death do us part. She cried, I can't. Jack looked her straight in the eye. But why can't you? Because I can't cheat on her. Nancy jumped up in anger. She screamed. Who is she, by the way? Can't you see she's the separatrix? That bitch seduced you and played on your weakness. She knew you were married, and that didn't stop her from spreading her legs. How do you know she won't cheat on you? She won't. Whatever you tell me you'll do now, she'll be something more than that. Resigned, she walked to the door and stopped. I'm tired, Jack. This divorce is eating me up inside. I'll call my parents first thing tomorrow to come over and help me pack, she said without turning to face him. I'm really sorry for my mistakes. Please forgive me for the pain I caused you. I wish I could have been wiser. I wish you a happy life with your future wife. She left for her room with her head down. The next morning, Nancy's parents came in early. Dark circles under your eyes, sleepless nights again, Mary asked. Nancy didn't answer. You should have left this place the first time he dropped a bomb on you, John told his daughter. I know, Daddy, but I wanted him back. Just forget about him. There are plenty of young men out there who would fall in love with you in a heartbeat, Mary spat out. I have to say a few words to that asshole. Wake him up, John raged. Just leave him alone. You're wasting your time, Dad. Mom, go help me with the packing, please. You wanted to talk. Jack was coming down the stairs. Yeah, asshole. John turned red with anger. You're a real son of a bitch. Dad, please. Nancy shook her head. I need to tell that piece of shit what I think of him. John turned to Jack. Because of your male ego, you can't accept that your wife should have some private time to herself, too. She worked very hard, overtime, and for what? To bring in extra money so you both can buy a house as soon as possible as planned? Maybe she went a little overboard with her bachelorette parties or Saturday shopping, but she needed that so she could relax. She admits she made a mistake and apologizes, so what do? You cheat on her with the first whore you see and make her cry with love for you. Jack was silent and stared intently into John's eyes. Nancy grabbed her father's arm and tried to drag him upstairs to her room. The first day you brought him into our home, I knew he wasn't right for you, Nancy. You were so much in love that I kept quiet and prayed I was wrong. Come on, John. Mary reassured him, we have more important things to do. Mother and daughter took John's hands and led him upstairs. Jack opened the door and found John's van in the middle of the driveway. He decided to walk the 2 blocks to the nearest cafe. 3 months later, on the eve of the hearing, Nancy took a few days off work. Along with her parents, they went to spend some time at their summer cottage. She wanted to be away from the crowds. She knew the divorce would be granted by a judge and she didn't want to attend the trial. She didn't want to be disturbed by friends and coworkers. She asked her parents to turn off their cell phones. The next morning at 11 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. All 3 of them looked at each other. No one knew where they were. Mary opened the door to Jack, who was standing at the entrance. I have something to tell Nancy, and it would be good if you were present, Jack said to Nancy's parents. How dare you come in here, you asshole? Get off my property now, shouted John. Nancy was silent. She didn't know what to do. I've tried calling and even stopped by your house. I assume you have all your cell phones turned off. Jack turned to Mary, ignoring John. I knew all of you would be here. He was still standing in the doorway. What do you want, Jack? Nancy found the courage to ask. The judge has already granted the divorce at 10 o'clock this morning. As of today, we're single. You came all this way just to tell my daughter you're single again? Mary raised her voice. Please leave before I break your jaw. John jabbed his finger at Jack. My daughter has suffered for the last 3 months, and you came here today to hammer the final nail in the coffin. I suffered for 6 months and no one ever noticed, screamed Jack. Everyone was stunned by Jack's sudden outburst of anger. He pushed Mary aside and entered the room. I've never had a mistress, Jack barked at Nancy. I never cheated on you, Nancy. It was a setup. But why? Nancy was shocked by Jack's revelation. John and Mary froze. Why? Can you say the same thing? Jack asked. Say what? That you never cheated on me? Nancy suddenly felt her legs growing weak. She couldn't stand. She collapsed into the chair. Jack turned to his former father-in-law. For all of those 6 months, that bitch had been sleeping with her boss, Alan Perkins. There was suddenly complete silence in the room. John and Mary couldn't believe their ears. They looked at their daughter. She couldn't meet their gaze. She began to cry. All that overtime, bachelorette parties or Saturday shopping, it was all a sham. You slept with him in motels or in the back seat of his car. I had a private investigator following you around, and I have DVDs. Lots of DVDs. Please, honey, John pleaded with Nancy. Tell me it's not true that he's lying. I'm so sorry, exclaimed Nancy. I could have divorced you with all the proof I had. But I wanted to do something to make you suffer, to make you feel what I felt, to make you know what it means to be deceived. I wanted to make you hurt, to make you feel pain, to make you bleed. Jack spat. You did things to him that you always denied me. You know what I'm talking about. You gave him what was mine. You disrespected me. You had no time for me, but you spent every spare minute with him. You're the worst whore I know. Nancy cried louder. Mary hugged her husband tightly. Turn on your cell phone. You must be getting hundreds of calls from work and from Alan. Nancy frowned, picked up her cell phone, and turned it on. She had a lot of missed calls and messages. Since we were still married yesterday, my attorney filed a lawsuit against the insurance company and Alan Perkins. Alienation of affection is still a crime in our state. No, Nancy exclaimed. According to my lawyer, we can get up to 7 figures. One good use for your deception is that you'll bring me some money. Jack laughed. Nancy glanced at her cell phone. The missed calls were from her work and from Alan Perkins. She read the last text message. It was from HR asking her to call them as soon as possible. She scrolled down to Alan's message. He was frantic. By the way, I contacted Alan's wife yesterday and gave her the DVD set. She said she would send him to the cleaners and prevent him from seeing his 2 children. She even offered to let me sleep with her in retaliation. I'm seeing her tonight since I'm not married now. He's got a family. Why did you do that? Nancy asked. I didn't do anything. You're the one who destroyed their home when you started spreading your legs in front of him. And you know what's funny? I intend to move in with Mrs. Perkins for a while to rub it in Alan's face because he still has to pay the mortgage while I have his wife in his own bed. It would be better if you left now, Jack, John said. Right now we're going to have to deal with our own misery. I'm not done yet, Jack roared at John and turned to Nancy. I'm sure the insurance company has already fired you, Alan too. He had you after hours at your workplace and demanded overtime for you. I don't think he'll get another job in the financial sector. Nancy couldn't look Jack in the eye. She just shook her head. By the way, last month I lost a bag containing a set of your famous DVDs. And this morning I found out that they had been uploaded to the internet with your names, phone numbers, and addresses, Jack smirked. Don't worry about getting fired. I'm sure you'll get a job in the sex industry. My God, Nancy fainted. I'm done now. Jack walked to the door and turned to face John. This asshole wants nothing to do with all of you and doesn't want to see you again. That bitch can rot in hell. He turned and walked out of the room. If you found this story as shocking and heart-wrenching as we did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life dramas. Share your thoughts below and tell us what you would have done in this situation. Until next time, stay tuned for more unbelievable tales of Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we have a story that will leave you absolutely speechless. Get ready for an intense tale titled, Caught My Cheating Wife Begging for Forgiveness, My Brutal Revenge. All this time, I was sure that our marriage was strong and reliable. I was ready to do everything to make our life happy and full of love. But one day, I discovered that my wife was only using me as a means to her own ends. She had cheated on me, and it was not the first time. Realizing I was just a puppet in her hands, I decided to get back at her for her betrayal. All this time, I was sure that our marriage was strong and reliable. I was ready to do everything to make our life happy and full of love. But one day I discovered that my wife was only using me as a means to her own ends. She had cheated on me, and it was not the first time. I realized that all along she had her own plan and I was just a puppet in her hands. But I wasn't going to stay idle and decided to get back at her for her betrayal. Matvey and Alina had known each other since high school. The boy had been in love with the first beauty of their school for many years and once even worked up the courage to ask her out. But she sharply rejected him. She preferred to go out with a cocky high school student named Pasha. He seemed mature and very cool to her. Matvey sometimes heard other girls whispering behind his back discussing his unrequited love. And Alina herself was with Pavel right up until graduation. After graduation, Matvey studied at university working in parallel, and after graduation began to rise by leaps and bounds on the career ladder. He managed to get a job at an international company. He began to earn a lot of money. He bought himself a spacious apartment and a nice car and helped his parents. He also liked to travel. The impressions of travel greatly energized him. One day, he was invited to another meeting of classmates. Matvey decided to go there for a change. It was there that his meeting with Alina took place many years later. When she saw Matvey, she could not even believe her eyes. The man, though clothed, was restrained, but she roughly understood the cost of all these things on him. They were talking. Alina questioned her former suitor with great interest about what he was living now. And by the minute she was getting more and more into some kind of relationship with him. They exchanged phone numbers, and the next day Alina was the first to call. Now after all these years she herself made a date with Matvey. Over all these years he had not lost his warm feelings for Alina. And although in the past she had rejected him and dated someone else, none of that mattered. Now they met as adults. And Matvey was glad that Alina was finally interested in him herself. Their relationship began very quickly. Alina knew what she wanted from this life. So the slow development of the novel did not interest her. Their wedding took place just 6 months later. Although Matvey's parents tried to tell him it was too soon. And it was still necessary to get to know each other better. They began to travel together. Matvey showed his wife various countries and their local colors. Alina watched everything with her mouth open and was as excited as a child. When they returned to their city, the woman began to take more and more of her work from Hula, explaining that she was not feeling well. At the same time, she often began to complain to her husband that she was very tired of working. Her bosses didn't appreciate her, and she felt that she was wasting her time there. These were no longer subtle hints but real manipulations. And Matvey fell for it. He still could not rejoice that the love of his youth, now his lawful spouse. Of course, after all this talk, he himself suggested that she quit her job and rest at home. He would take care of everything. Alina's dream finally came true. She lives in her husband's luxurious apartment. He allows her not to work and does not deny her anything. They lived like this for a few more years. And then her husband's business trip, which lasted several weeks, happened. He and his wife would call each other late at night, but sometimes she would miss a call, claiming that she was very tired from the day. When Matvey returned, it was as if the atmosphere in his home had changed. His wife did not welcome him with the same joy as usual. She acted rather reserved and even a little aloof, which really hurt the man. He thought she had something going on or was just in a bad mood. So he didn't emphasize it. Intuitively, he sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't give it much thought. During the next month that he was in town, his wife's being just as slightly different. She started spending more and more time with her girlfriends, sometimes returning home, and even later than her husband. When Matvey asked her what she was doing all that time away from home, she said that her best friend was also out of work now, and they went to salons and sports centers together or just went for a walk. One day Matvey was supposed to have a business meeting at a restaurant in the center of town. On that day things did not go well from the very morning. First he left important documents at home and on his way back to pick them up. He was late for work. Then some minor mishaps at the office threw him off balance. And now he was stuck in a traffic jam not far from that very restaurant. As he sat in his car, irritably texting his colleague that he might be late because of the traffic situation, his attention was caught by two silhouettes gliding outside the window. Matvey looked up and saw a couple. His wife was walking with some man and was hanging out with him interestedly. The husband's previously unknown feeling of jealousy pricked him. He could see for sure that it was his wife and how she was enjoying herself in the company of another man. Interesting choice of girlfriends she has, of course, he thought irritatedly. The traffic was moving very slowly and Matvey decided to follow where the two men were going. They were going straight to the restaurant where Matvey himself was headed. After about 10 minutes, all the cars parted, and the man was able to turn around and park beside the place. He went in very carefully, looking around to see where his wife was sitting, but at the same time not to get caught. He was lucky. The table at which his meeting was taking place was at a decent distance from the table where Alina was sitting with her companion. While this colleague was talking to his partners, Matvey was watching his wife without blinking. At last, he could make out who she was with. The face seemed painfully familiar, but the man had to strain his memory hard to figure out who it was. With horror to himself, he recognized in her companion, Paul, the same one Alina had dated back in high school. With each passing minute, his faith in the best was evaporating faster and faster. Alina openly flirted with Pasha, and at one point he began stroking her thigh. Matvey desperately wanted to take out the anger that was boiling inside of him on these two, but he was held hostage to the situation. The meeting was very important. He could not lose face. As a result, the man thought, since these two were acting this way, their relationship had not lasted the first day. Yes, he was hurt because of this infidelity. He was ready to tear up and throw up. But he understood that these emotions would not make things better. He could deal with the unfaithful spouse later, but now he had better things to do. He concentrated on the negotiations and held them to the highest standard. Alina and her lover left before he did. It was obvious they were in a hurry to finally get some privacy. Afterwards, Matvey drove home. He threw all of Alina's belongings into bags and took them to the nearest garbage can. When the traitor returned home, she was extremely surprised. The door was locked from the inside with a latch. Then her husband opened it. He said that now she no longer lived here, and if she had time, she could still fight the local bums at the dump for her clothes. The woman first thought her husband was joking, but when the door slammed in her face, she realized that he had found out. The couple divorced. Matvey was even glad that his mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. It turned out to be very convenient. Alina never once apologized to Matvey for her betrayal. Nothing bad happened for her. She simply acted out of self-interest. For a long time after school, she was constantly on and off with Pavel because he could not provide her with everything. But when she found out that Pavel's financial situation had improved, she was the first to make contact. In fact, he was the only one she really loved. But his plight a few years ago prevented her from staying with him. She met Matthew and realized that he could give her the life she wanted. Now she began to live with Pavel again. Matvey understood that Alina would forever be the one who would be constantly on the lookout for a better place. She would change her partners an endless number of times without sticking with anyone for long. Instead of building a future with her husband, helping him and reaching for the heights together, she has chosen to live a parasitic lifestyle. But life is complicated, and staying on the crest of success all the time won't work. Black bars happen to everyone. So the claim that Paul was lucky to stay with such a woman together was highly questionable. She would stay with him, but only until his first bad luck. Second story. I might never have known the truth about my wife. But when my friend suddenly showed up with the words, "I need to tell you something about your wife," I felt something was wrong. I couldn't even think what he was going to say. But what followed was so amazing that I didn't know what to do next. It turned out that my wife had been cheating on me for months, and my friend had known about it all along. He told me everything he knew, and I decided to take justice into my own hands. I got my revenge on her for cheating. In this video, I will tell you the whole story, and you will learn how I found out the truth about my wife, and how I decided to get revenge on her. Ruslan and Sophia had been married for 6 years. Sonia was a manicurist, and Ruslan worked for a small company as a landscape designer. A couple of years ago, they took an apartment on a mortgage, and were gradually fixing it up. The couple had been trying for over a year to have a child. Both were ready to take on the role of parents, but nothing worked, even though they had already had some tests done, and everything was normal. They did not want to take any drastic steps, so they just kept hoping that someday they would finally get lucky. Ruslan had a good friend whose name was Andrew. The man, unlike his companion, was lonely and lived alone. He did not have much luck in relationships. At some point, he had already accepted this state of affairs, and stopped busting his neck to get acquainted with anyone. He was comfortable enough as it was. They had met in high school and had been in touch ever since. As adults, they didn't see each other that often. When they did meet, it was as if they hadn't been together all that time. One afternoon, Andrew was going about his business, and decided to walk through the park. His head was occupied with the repairs he was making. so he hardly paid any attention to those who passed him by. Suddenly, he stumbled over some rock in the middle of the path, and it snapped him out of his heap of thoughts. He glanced around to see if anyone had noticed his fall, when suddenly, he spotted a familiar silhouette ahead. He stepped a little closer and recognized her. It was Sophia, his friend's wife. She was walking in the company of a man. "Sonia, hello," shouted Andrew, walking a little closer. The woman turned around. "Andrew, hello. I didn't expect to see you here." The man had already held out his hand to her companion to say hello. "Andre Kostia." At that moment, the woman tensed a little. She bit her lip and then said with a laugh, "This is my brother. He came to town for the day. Here to give us a tour. We're really in a bit of a hurry, sorry." Andrew replied that it was no big deal. He asked him to say hello to Ruslan, and then they said goodbye. He stared intently at Konstantine's face. Something tensed him in the whole situation. It was either Sanja's reaction or her hurry. For a second, he even thought there was far from a kinship between these two. But the telephone call from a client distracted him, pushing the man's doubts away. In the flow of events and working moments, Andrew had completely forgotten about the situation in the park. He was not even surprised at the absence of a call from Ruslan. Usually, if he said hello to him through his acquaintances, he considered it his duty to call and meet him. But the friend did not show up until a few months later. One evening, Ruslan dialed his comrade and informed him in a joyful voice that soon he would finally become a father. You know, nothing much had happened before that. And here is the real news, and I decided to share it with you. Andrew sincerely congratulated his friend. He knew how long he and his wife had come to this. At the end of the year, in the winter, Ruslan even invited him to the maternity hospital to be discharged. Afterward, they sat together for a while and celebrated. Later, there was a lull. The couple fully immersed themselves in taking care of the baby. The world began to revolve around him. From time to time, they would write to each other. But for the most part, Ruslan was immersed in his work to provide his family with everything they needed. They had not seen each other for over a year. And one day on his day off, Andrew was passing through the neighborhood where his comrade lived. He had to pick up an order at the pickup point, which was in their house. And, by happy coincidence, he met Ruslan in the street. He was strolling along with the stroller. Andre shouted at him, and he gestured for him to keep his voice down. The child dozed off. It turned out that his wife had sent him for a walk with his son, and wanted to relax and unwind. The friends were talking. Andrew looked at the little boy and asked if he could tell what the child looked like. He looked more like his mother. He didn't take anything from me as if he didn't like it, apparently. He made a joke. My friend did not appreciate the joke. He suddenly remembered seeing his wife with some stranger, whom she introduced as her brother. And this was not long before the news of the pregnancy. I'm sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but have you ever considered that the baby might not be yours? Andre asked seriously. Ruslan looked at him like he was crazy. He laughed and asked why he suddenly thought so. A friend snapped and decided to tell him that he had seen his wife with someone in the park at the time. After that, Ruslan was not so cheerful anymore. Well, hello. She certainly didn't tell me from you. She didn't say that she saw you at all. And your brother? Kostya, you say? She doesn't have any brothers and I don't remember any cousins. He said thoughtfully. And she certainly did not tell me that any of her relatives visited her at that time. This news shook Ruslan. He still felt euphoric that he finally had his heir. Besides, he had always found that he and his wife had a good relationship. But now doubts about his wife's faithfulness had settled in his mind. Yes, and at a time when they were ready to give up, and she suddenly became pregnant. At that time, Ruslan thought it was a miracle. But now everything was covered with a shroud of doubt. He thanked his friend for telling him about the incident, even though it was so much later. That night, he had waited for his wife's return more anxiously than ever before. He knew there was a serious talk to be had. As he waited for her, sitting in complete silence in the kitchen, he went over in his head all the suspicious things that he might in the past have simply turned a blind eye to. When their next attempt to have a baby failed, he felt at one point as if his wife had grown cold to the idea altogether. She didn't say she'd changed her mind, but you could feel it in the look on her face. Then there was even some coldness between them, but Ruslan put it down to hormonal background. The man decided to call his mother-in-law and find out from the source whether there was a certain Constantine among his wife's brothers after all. He veiled this strange question by saying that a certain man came to their house when Sonia was away and introduced himself as her brother. Our fears had already been confirmed. There was no such man among her cousins or even third cousins. When the man hung up, Sonia had just returned home. After she had checked on the baby, the man decided to start a conversation. He began from afar, mentioning Kostya, who had recently dropped in on her as if to visit. Ruslan decided not to specify the degree of their relationship and just watched her reaction. Sonia did not make eye contact. She constantly looked away. When the man's name came up, it was as if she tensed up. But she tried not to show it. "Do you know him, dear?" her husband asked in a calm tone. "Yes, he's a former colleague." "And what did he want?" Pronounced Sonia. "He wanted to see his child." The husband decided to go along with the provocation. Sonia went dramatically pale and didn't blink for a couple of seconds. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish on dry land. Ruslan decided to squeeze her. "So he's right, isn't he? You didn't cheat with him, did you? It seems time to do a paternity test." His words thundered to his wife. Then she tried to pull herself together. "I've been agonizing for hours to give you a son. And you're doing this to me," she howled. "Well, if it really is my baby, what do you have to worry about?" her husband said calmly. The expression on the woman's face was as if she were ready to burst with anger. Forgetting about the sleeping baby, she started yelling at her husband for trying to avoid responsibility for the baby like a coward. She threatened that now she would go to her mother and Ruslan would never see her again. Then she tearfully began packing her belongings. The expertise made it clear that the baby was not Ruslan after all. After that, he and Sonia scandalously divorced. The man was both angry and depressed by this news. He had already managed to get used to the role of the father, attached to this little lump of happiness. All this time, Andra had been by Ruslan's side and supported him in this difficult period. Sonia went to her parents. By then, she had long been out of touch with her lover. But now, feeling vulnerable, she tried to resume communication with him. But Kostya himself was not eager to do so. He already had his own family, and he did not care about Sonia. So, in an attempt to deceive her husband, the woman lost her own game. Such is the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster. If you are moved by Matvi's story of betrayal and epic revenge, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share this video to remind everyone of the importance of trust and fidelity in relationships. Stay tuned for more captivating content, and remember, actions have consequences, and the truth